Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Welcome to part one of this series where we talk about the legends of Islamic history. And today we'll discuss an extraordinary king, an extraordinary figure in Islamic history. So when someone learns the Quran, they become a hafiz, and that's a big achievement in of itself, right? You learn Allah's words. Then if someone, masters poetry, and they're known as a poet, a good poet, that's a good achievement as well. If someone, is a good calligrapher, he's known as a good calligrapher. So people have all these different qualities, right? If someone's a good conqueror, good military leader, they'll be known for that. But imagine someone had all these qualities: calligrapher, poet, conqueror, administrator, a hafiz. Imagine one person had all of these, and that is the person that we're going to discuss today, the great Muslim king, Aurangzeb Alamgir. And he is a very, important figure for Muslims to learn. The reason for this is that, if you're from Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, all of these kind of places, you'll know about him because he's probably the most prominent or most renowned Muslim figure, because he ruled India, Pakistan and Bangladesh under one entity, the Mughal Empire. But if you're from, Egypt, Morocco, Turkey, or wherever you're from, many people from these countries, they don't know him. And I would say you've got of course the Rashidun, who are radiallahu anhu, the best after the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then you have Omar ibn Abdulaziz rahimahullah, Salahuddin. After that, Aurangzeb's in the conversation as a great Muslim ruler, and we'll see in due course why, because he had all these qualities that I've mentioned, and I've still got to mention in due course, inshallah. And why is he different to other? Why is he that great? Well, firstly, in comparison to other Muslim rulers within India, he was diligent in his deen. He would pray 5 times a day. He, as I said, learned the Quran. He some people call him a mujadid, meaning a reviver, because he created, and we'll talk about it in more depth later, he created the biggest compendium of Hanafi fiqh. So the biggest compilation of Hanafi law in history. And that's the reason why many, of course, Hanafism came to India much before, but his rule cemented Hanafism, because this Fatwa-e Alamgiri, or also known as the Fatwa-e Hindiya, talked about every single facet of life, from marriage to legal disputes, to any type of issue you had, any type of legal dispute. The Fatwa-e Alamgiri had talked about every single facet extensively. So this is the figure that we're talking about today. But not just that, it's also good to understand him and the controversy surrounding him, because there is some controversy, and we'll see how that has been misrepresented by colonial writers and also certain Islamophobes. But he's also used as I said before, he's used as a figure to hate the Muslims. Some Muslims in India face persecution because of the government right now. Not everyone supports it, and most people in India are good people, loving people, but there's a small minority that cause issues for Muslims, and they hate Muslims. Okay. So Aurangzeb is used as a stick to beat Muslims. So, like some people a small minority use Aurangzeb to beat the Muslims. They call the Muslims of India Babur ki Aulud, which means, Aurangzeb ki Aulud, which means the progeny of Aurangzeb. And why is this something to know? Because when you say you're the progeny of Aurangzeb, and Aurangzeb, as we'll talk about in due course, his ancestors come from Central Asia. They're Turco-Mongol. So if you're saying, okay, you Muslims are descendants of Turco-Mongols or of Aurangzeb, it gives them justification to say, oh, you are outsider and cause oppression. But I have to reiterate, this is not everyone, this is a very small minority, but it's good to understand why Aurangzeb is important. But enough with just why Aurangzeb is important and the introduction. How did he, appear? So to understand Aurangzeb, we need to look at the start of the Mughal Empire. And the Mughal Empire establishes itself in 1526 by a man called Zahir al-Din Babur. And he defeats another Muslim dynasty that ruled northern India, just the north of India, called the Lodi dynasty. And they were one of the dynasties, a part of the Delhi Sultanate. So the Delhi Sultanate ruled from 1206 or 1204, there's a difference of opinion, to 1526. And there was 5 different dynasties. And they ruled India to a certain extent. For example, the Tughluks, they ruled nearly the whole of India, from the north to the south. However, the Lodis, which was another dynasty, part of the Delhi Sultanate, they ruled a little part of northern India. And Babur, as he's known, he's actually a descendant of Timur, the great conqueror Timur, and of Genghis Khan, another great conqueror. So he's descendant of Timur through his father and Genghis Khan through his mother. And what's interesting is that Timur actually, he established a great empire across Central Asia, Persia, half of Turkey, and he raided all the way to Delhi in 1398. But he decided not to stay there. And then afterwards, his descendants, they divided up his empire. And then over time, it got to a point where Babur inherited a very small piece of land in Uzbekistan called the Fergana Valley. However, he lost it. He lost it due to infighting and due to his cousins trying to get the power, reclaim the territory. So as a result, he eventually left Central Asia and he went to India. And he was called on by a member of the Lodi dynasty family to defeat Ibrahim Lodi. And so he fought Ibrahim Lodi at the Battle of Panipat in 1526. And even though Babur's army had about 12,000 men at most, and the Lodi army was between 50 to 70,000 men, so they were outnumbered significantly. However, the reason why Babur emerged victorious was due to the superior weaponry that they had. They basically outgunned, the Lodi army. They had elephants and stuff like that, and they had these type of weapon like cannons and stuff. So the elephants ran away and they won at the Battle of Panipat. So even though Babur, he didn't really like living in India. He said he didn't like the climate and the people he interacted with. This was his words in his book, the Babur Nama, which is like his personal biography that he wrote himself about his life and whatnot. However, he decided to stay in India because he wanted to claim a realm for himself. Because as I said before, he couldn't go back to Central Asia. So he wanted to revive the legacy of Timur. And the only way he could do that was through establishing his little empire in northern India. So Babur actually doesn't rule for that long. So 1526 up until 1530. And Babur, he like many Mughal emperors, they weren't the most pious in their deen. They would drink, they would take opium, these kind of practices they would do. And this is actually quite common throughout Islamic history, where you have people that they would indulge in these intoxicants. So that's Babur. He rules up until 1530. Then he is replaced by his son. And the reason why he dies so young, I think he's in his 40s or 50s, is because they would take so much intoxicants that they would just die of, like, not natural causes, but just of abusing, abusing their own body. So Humayun comes into power, and Humayun's very weak. Humayun is a very weak leader, but he manages to rule northern India for about 10 years. For 10 years, there is calm. However, during that period, during the latter 5 years, a man by the name of Sher Shah Suri, also known as Sher Khan, he starts to build his power base. So he's like a soldier of fortune. and he starts to build up an army, and he basically becomes like the ruler of Bihar and Bengal. And Bihar and Bengal are in the northeast. And then what he does is that he fights Humayun at the Battle of Chausa in 1539 and the Battle of Khanuj in 1540. And he defeats, Sher Shah Suri defeats Humayun in both battles, and so Humayun flees and he's on the run. And why am I talking about Sher Shah Suri? Even though he actually only ruled for about 5 years, from 1540 to 1545, yeah? He ruled for 5 years, but he was a brilliant administrator. You know, what's the currency in India and Pakistan? Do you guys know? Rupees. He introduced the rupiah. He introduced it. He also employed many Hindus to his his ranks. Like a lot of Hindus were in his army and his officers. So he was very on this kind of wavelength of coexistence and bringing people together. He also made improvements to the Grand Trunk Road. So the Grand Trunk Road is this big road in India that is used for trade and stuff like that, and he improved it to a great extent. And also, he systemized the measurement of agricultural lands. And this is just a few tidbits that he's done. There's so many more things. In only 5 years, he's done so many improvements and reforms and innovations. However, unfortunately, he goes into battle and he dies. So his son comes into power, Islam Shah Suri, and he rules for about 9 to 10 years. Then he dies. Then there's a succession crisis within the Mughal Empire, the Sur Empire. That's what they call it. And this allows Humayun to come back. He sees the situation, and this is the pretext to come back and reclaim his territory. So Humayun, who's been on the run, he got help from the Safavids with arms and soldiers and whatnot. So they fight. One of Shah Khan's descendants. They fight at the Battle of Sirhind in 1555, and Humayun emerges victorious in this battle, and so he re-establishes the Mughal Empire. However, he dies just less than a year later in 1556, and the reason why he dies is because he was in his library and he fell down the stairs. And you may be wondering why he fell down the stairs, and that is because, as I said before, a lot of these Mughal emperors, they would take opium, they would drink, and so we believe he was intoxicated when he fell down the stairs. So he re-establishes the Mughal Empire in 1555. He dies in 1556. So his son Akbar comes into power, and Akbar, he has a very controversial legacy in academia. Depending on how you view it, he could be a good ruler, he could be a bad ruler, depending on what your stance and ideology is. So, and the reason for this is that he created his own religion called Deen Ilahi. And you might be wondering, why did he create his own religion? So, initially, he was very, very religious. He was very pious. He would sweep the floors of mosques. This was an emperor, and he would sweep the floors of mosques. What else would he do? He would get the slippers of the imams and place it for the imam, so whenever he would go out and whatnot. Another thing that he would do was that he used to pay people. He used to patronize and give like scholarship to people to go to perform the Hajj. He would pay people to perform Hajj. And he himself, loads of good deeds. He himself, actually one more thing, he would lead the prayer. He would be the imam himself sometimes and lead the prayer, right, in the masjid it's called Fatehpur in India. And the last thing he would do was that he wanted himself to perform the Hajj, but he didn't perform the Hajj. Why? Because if he performed the Hajj, them times it would take months. You'd take the caravan, you would go all the way from India to Mecca. It would take a long time, right? I don't know specifically how long, but it would take months minimum. But the thing is, it's months as well. Yeah. So they didn't have the ships that we have nowadays that you can go. So he didn't. He had the intention to go, but he didn't go. Can anyone tell me why he didn't go?
Because somebody would take his empire if he went away for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. That is the reason. He didn't want to, he was advised not to go because if he went, his detractors or someone that had a claim to the throne could usurp the Mughal throne and become the ruler. That's why Ottoman sultans, they didn't go to perform the Hajj. That's why many rulers in history, even if they were very pious, I don't think Salahuddin even performed Hajj. Why? Because if you left, it would be open season for rebellion and usurpation of the crown, for lack of a better word. So, and sorry, to go back to Akbar, he actually came into power when he was 13. So he was ruled under a regent by the name of Bayram Khan. And then after a few years, he basically, put him to a side and he ruled on his own behalf. And Akbar, he was very interested in philosophy, religion, and all of these kind of things. And so he created this institution called the Ibadah Khana, which is like a institution of like religious debates. So it would have rabbis. He would have like Zoroastrian priests. He would have Hindu yogis. He would have Muslim imams. He would have Christian priests. He would have any religious persuasion you can think of. He would have them debating. However, he saw that the ulama there, they had bad character. They were not imam of haqq. They were imam of batil. They were very, they didn't have the best character. They didn't have maybe the best arguments. So he used to watch these debates. He used to watch them, like how they, like the arguments and whatnot. And he saw how they weren't treating their opponent in the debate with the best of respect. And furthermore, their arguments weren't the strongest. So he started to side with the people debating, the ulama. And so eventually he said, if this is what Islam has to offer, I don't want it. I want to create my own religion. So he synchronized all these different persuasions. So there's Hinduism in his Deen Ilahi, there's Christianity, there's Islam, there's Zoroastrianism. There's he just got the best of everything, he thought, and put it all into one. And you may be wondering, why did he apostate? Wouldn't he know that this is just people of bad character? Well, all of us, we all have different levels of iman. Different levels. Of course, our iman fluctuates, but we have a baseline. Some people's is higher, some people's is lower. Some people have a better understanding of the deen, other people don't. And you might be wondering, why doesn't he have a good understanding of the deen? And the reason for this is that he was born during the period of instability of when Humayun fled, and when Humayun fled, he was going from place to place until he permanently settled in Persia. And because of that kind of instability, Akbar didn't have the right education, so he didn't know how to read or write. So he'd get people to read for him. And so, of course, he didn't know how to read or write, and he would rely on other people. They could lie and say, oh, this and that and the third. So that's why he slowly drifted away. Though some people say on his deathbed, he did repent, but Allahu Alam, his son Jahangir, who comes into power in 1605. So Akbar rules for a long time. 1556 to 1605. So he rules for a long time, about 49 years. And yeah, Jahangir, when he dies, he says, when Akbar dies, he says, Jahangir says, my father repented, but maybe this was to save his face, to save face, right? But Allahu Alam, because there's always these stories where, this guy repented on his deathbed, this guy repented on his deathbed, but we don't know if this is actually true. We hope he does, but Allahu Alam. So Jahangir is the next ruler, and he rules from 1605 to 1627. And it's during his rule that Aurangzeb is born. And it goes Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb is actually born during his grandfather's reign, Jahangir. And Shah Jahan is a prince at this time. So the prince has his own son, has a son while he's a prince. He's not even a king. So this is the way, because back in those times, they'd have children quite young, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And Aurangzeb has the usual Mughal, education of a nobleman, right? So he'll learn Quran, Hadiths, the biographies of religious figures, whether that was the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, the Salaf, or because there was a lot of Sufism in the Mughal Empire in India, maybe also religious biographies of Sufi mystics. He also would learn the Turkic language, and he learned the art of calligraphy, and that's how he became such a he had such great ability in doing calligraphy, because he learned it at a young age. He also learned because they call it, the academics call it India in the Persianate age. I actually have a book right here, India in the Persianate age. They would also learn Persian culture, Persian language. So, for example, he learnt Persian classics such as Sa'di, Nasruddin Tusi, and Hafiz. So these are like Persian figures, Muslim Persian figures. He also learned Hindi. So Akbar was the first to learn Hindi, then Jahangir, Shah Jahan, of course, and then Aurangzeb. So they would learn Hindi. He knew Hindi, he knew Turkic, Persian, and also Urdu and Hindi are basically the same language, but Urdu is like the other two languages, put a bit of influence into Hindi, and that's Urdu. And Urdu actually originates from India. Even though it's the language of Pakistan, it originates in India, in northern India. And Urdu comes from the phrase Zaban-i Urdu, meaning language of the camp. And because they would speak Hindi, but they would mix a lot of Persianate words, a lot of Arabic words, a lot of Turkic words, and that's how Urdu came about. So it's quite interesting.
So the people that they ruled over, they spoke Hindi?
Yeah, in the north Hindi, in the south languages like Malayalam, Marathi, what's the other? Kannada. And he also learned other skills such as military strategy, administrative skills, horsemanship, all of these kind of things that a normal prince would learn. However, the most notorious aspect of his childhood, of his early life, was that he knew that one day he'll have to fight his brothers. And people look at this, they're so barbaric. They're so, they're causing dhulm upon their other brothers, because one day when the emperor dies, everyone has to fight, all the brothers have to fight each other. Because it wasn't like in Europe. So it was a Turkic tradition of survival of the fittest. So instead of, in Europe, it's the first son. The first son becomes the king. It's called primogeniture. Primogeniture, which means, the first son inherits it automatically. However, the Turkic tradition was survival of the fittest. So any of the brothers, they had if you're 20, if you're 50, if you're 10, however old you were, when the emperor dies, you all have the same shot. And they had this phrase, Ya takht, ya tabut, either the throne or the coffin. It was like life or death, right? You either fight for the throne against your own brothers, or you're going to be executed. No, Aurangzeb was the third born. So I'm going to go in due course, but you have Dara Shikoh, Shah Shoja, Aurangzeb, and Murad Bakhsh. And yeah, so we see it in modern times. They're so ruthless, and at face value, out of context, it is very brutal. You fight against your own brother. However, that's all they knew. That was their life they knew. And this isn't something exclusive to the Mughals. This is actually the Ottomans done it. So who conquered Constantinople? Mehmed what? The second. Mehmed Fatih. He actually killed. He eliminated his younger brother. Infant. No, it's true. Why? Because any claim to the throne was seen as like a threat, right? A competition. So, and there was one Ottoman Sultan, the name slipped out of my mind. He killed about 19 of his siblings. Then Selim I, who conquered the three holy cities, Jerusalem, Mecca, Medina, he eliminated his brothers as well. one of his siblings. So this was a Turkic tradition. It's the norm. And yes, we now see it as barbaric, but them times, that's all they knew, and that's what they thought was the best, and that was their tradition. So Aurangzeb is often he's accused of fratricide, which is the killing of your brother. But Jahangir done it. So Shah Jahan, his father killed his brother Khusro in 1622 when he was a prince, and then after he became the emperor in 1627, a year later he killed his brother Shahryar. And already during Aurangzeb's early life, the differences between Dara Shikoh and Aurangzeb, Dara Shikoh was his main enemy, and the person we'll talk about extensively in due course. The rivalry, their differences already began to appear at an early age, because Dara Shikoh was more of the books, of more thinking, philosophy, all of that kind of persuasions. Meanwhile, Aurangzeb was more of a on the battlefield, administrative, that kind of ruler, leader. So they had two different kind of ideas of how they wanted to live their life as a ruler, if whoever was to become ruler. So one interesting story about Aurangzeb was that at 14, he showed that how of a strong man he was in comparison to his brother. And this is a very just not meaningless story, but it's to see the context of the differences in character. So in the Mughal Empire, there used to be this game where they would see the crowd would go to watch two elephants fight. So during the Roman times, it was like gladiators or animals or whatever the case may be. They would have like this kind of nowadays football or basketball. Back then they would see animals fighting or whatever it is. That was the culture back then. So these two elephants fought as a pastime. So it went down to the three brothers, Dara Shikoh, Shah Shoja, and Aurangzeb. They went down to have a closer look. And then Aurangzeb was unfortunate in the sense that one of the elephants, he got mad and he just charged at Aurangzeb. And Aurangzeb was able to calm down the situation. He used he tamed the elephant, and he was at the front trying to tame it. Meanwhile, his brother Dara Shikoh was at the back, scared, frightened at what was going on. And this would be telling of their different characters during their princely career and during the War of Succession. So at the age of 16, Aurangzeb was sent to punish some rebels. So this rebel by the name of Jogar Singh Bundela, he rose up against the Mughal state. So Aurangzeb was sent off to capture and punish him. And this gave him the first experience of military strategy, logistics, and operations. And as a result of this first experience and the more experiences acquired along the way would allow him to beat his brother Dara Shikoh. Meanwhile, Dara Shikoh was mollycoddled within the courts because he was his father's favorite. And already, by the time he was 18, he became the governor of the Mughal Deccan. And the Deccan is the central and southern parts of India. And already, then 2 years later in 1638, so when he was 20, he got his father's permission to besiege a place called Baglana in the south. And he emerged victorious. At 20 years old, he managed to annex such a large territory that he was able to bring into the Mughal state about 400,000 rupees per year. And 400,000 rupees back then is way more than it is today, because of course there's inflation and that kind of stuff. And Shah Jahan, he wanted to emulate Timur's Central Asian Empire. He wanted to re-establish the Central Asian Empire for the Mughals. So he wanted to capture large parts of Central Asia. Why? Because his ancestor Timur had done the same. So he waited for the right reason, the right pretext, and that happened when there was a civil war in Central Asia. And so he first sent his youngest son Murad to do the job. He was successful initially. However, he decided to leave because he didn't like the terrain and stuff like that. So he returned back in shame. They were like, how could you? You had it in your grasp. He literally captured and occupied the parts of Central Asia that were ordered by his father, but he just didn't like the terrain, so he decided to leave. So what happened? He sent his other son, Aurangzeb. And Aurangzeb was sent to save the situation. He was very close to victory, but due to the fact that the winter came and soldiers were dying due to the winter, and also he had incompetent artillerymen that were very, at the last minute, they just weren't able to do that final push. Aurangzeb failed. Despite this failure, it was more experience. Meanwhile, Dara Shikoh never went into a major battle up until 1653. So Dara Shikoh was born in about 1615. Up until 1653, he never went into a major battle. Never. He was just mollycoddled within his court, reading books, writing very shirky stuff that we'll get into due course, because he was his father's favorite. And he was seen as the most liberal and most of, But basically, the Mughal emperors had this idea called Sul-i-Kul, meaning peace for all. And what Dara Shikoh wanted to do was merge, same way Akbar merged Islam and Hinduism and other religions. What's his name? Dara Shikoh done the same. So he basically said that the Vedas and the Upanishads, or the Panishads, I can't remember if it's a U before or not a U before. He said that they are the scriptures that that he believed that the Quran said that there's some concealed scriptures that you need to find. That's he believed this. I don't know where he got that from, and he believed that he thought he found it. So he made up his own theory of the Quran, and then he believed in his own theory, found it out that it was the Vedas and the Upanishads. He believed that these were the concealed scriptures that were mentioned. He believed that were mentioned in the Quran. So that's one thing he said. Another thing he done was that he wrote a book or a treatise called the Meetings of the Two Seas. And do you know what he said? Hinduism and Islam have the same source and they have the same outcome. How did he try to justify this? He said that because they have the same source, they come from the divinely inspired, and they have the same outcome, the hereafter and all of these kind of, that thing. So this is what he kind of believed. And so he was in his court doing all of this kind of stuff, while Aurangzeb was on the battlefield gaining experience and, helping his father conquer lands. So why does Dara Shikoh go on his first campaign in 1653? So the reason for this is that a city by the name of Kandahar in Afghanistan is a strategic city within Central Asia, and it changed hands about 5 times between the Safavids and the Mughals. So it kept changing hands. So and then by 1649, so 4 years earlier, the Safavids besieged the city and it fell. So Shah Jahan, he began building an army, and he spent so much money on this campaign. He spent more money on this campaign alone than the Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal, the big grave mausoleum, it's called a mausoleum in India. That Taj Mahal cost less than all the money he spent on this campaign. It shows you how much he was focused on this campaign. So Shah Jahan would, spend on building his army, the troops, the weaponry, all of that kind of stuff, and then pay then because there was multiple campaigns to Kandahar, as I'll get into. Aurangzeb was sent as a prince, and he was again let down by incompetent artillerymen. They couldn't besiege, and they weren't successful. So Shah Jahan sent his son Dara Shikoh. He sent his son Dara Shikoh saying, "You take it." So Dara Shikoh, as I said before, he never led a major military battle ever. Maybe small battles here and there, but never a major military battle. And he had this arrogance that he said, "I'll take Kandahar and I'll take in the following week Herat." So this guy was had so much confidence, even though he was incompetent. He had no military experience. He was very arrogant, but he was swayed by flattery. So he was like, no, it's my way. But then you say, oh no, this and that and the third. Like, he was easily manipulated. And he was, insensitive to his soldiers' suffering. So his soldiers would say, oh no, we're suffering in this way, or we need to do that. Like, he wouldn't listen. He was not very good. And of course, he lost. And Kandahar wasn't taken back by the Mughals. And as I said before, more money was spent on this campaign, the first one by Aurangzeb, then the second one, and all the campaigns that Shah Jahan done or commissioned to retake Kandahar. It cost less, it cost more than the Taj Mahal. One thing about the Taj Mahal I want to get straight here is that, have you heard of the thing where they cut all the hands of the people who built the Taj Mahal? You must have heard of it. You've heard of it. That's a myth. So, Dara Shikoh, he is quite jealous of his brother. Like, he's seen Aurangzeb, yeah, he lost Kandahar and he lost the other one, but he's winning military battles, he's losing, but he's there doing well in the kind of military aspect of things, while Dara Shikoh is incompetent and he's just in his court writing books and being a philosopher. So Dara Shikoh actually tells Aurangzeb to withdraw. Tells his father, because of his jealousy towards Aurangzeb, he tells his father Aurangzeb should withdraw from this campaign. So there was this campaign in 1657, and it was to conquer this sultanate in the south of India called Bijapur. And Aurangzeb was, he was collecting victories, and he annexed the whole territory except the capital. And conquering the capital was a foregone conclusion. He was going to do it. However, Dara Shikoh, knowing this and seeing this and hearing about this, he told Shah Jahan, his father, he basically persuaded him to get Aurangzeb to withdraw. So Aurangzeb was on the verge of victory, on conquering this sultanate. It was sizable, it was not big, it was not small, it was just some normal small state in the, not small state, some normal state in south of India. And so this caused, this furthered hostilities between them two, because Aurangzeb knew that his brother told his father to get him to withdraw. And this was in August of 1657 when he was told to withdraw. And what happens a month later? The War of Succession begins. So the Mughal emperors, they had this kind of practice, they had this practice called the Jaroka Darshan. So the Jaroka is the balcony. The Darshan is called the appearance. So, they would appear at the balcony. And this actually started during Humayun's reign. During Humayun's rule, they would appear at the balcony, and and the reason why they done this was because they would see that the king is well. Okay, the king is well, he'll do it twice a day. Okay, the king is well, we can all rest and whatnot. And sometimes they would actually pray to the king. They would actually pray to the king, So this was what they would do. And it started from Humayun, it continued with Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan. But one day Shah Jahan doesn't make an appearance. And he doesn't make an appearance for for 10 days. So everyone thinks the king is dead. Everyone thinks the king is dead. And Dara Shikoh tries to control the flow of information. Why? Because he knew that if the other brothers heard about this, then there would be an all-out war. So he wanted to cut the information, get to the throne, and name himself the peacock throne, as they would call it, and name himself the emperor, and then he could deal with his opponents afterwards. But even though he tried to control the flow of information, he was unable to, because everyone heard of it. Everyone heard. Aurangzeb got hold of it, who was in the Deccan in the south. Murad got hold of it, who was in Gujarat. and Shah Shoja got heard of it, who was in Bengal. And so Dara Shikoh, he wanted to evade the situation because he would know that everyone would start mobilizing. And when I say everyone would start mobilizing, it wasn't a thing where, oh, they would just mobilize an army of 50,000 or 100,000. They would literally mobilize a moving city. So there was a writer, a chronicler during the times of Jahangir, and he talked about how it was a moving city. You know, from one point to another point, it would take one whole day to move. Yeah? Do you get what I mean? Like they would move. So the first person he would move, he would be here. The last person, it would take a day to reach this exact point. And you might be wondering, what did they have? So it was not just the soldiers, it was the family members, it was markets, meat sellers, it would be anything to make a function in society. It was a whole entourage. So that's why these people they would support them to the death. You know, like the nobles, the officers, the soldiers, the meat sellers, the book sellers, like anything you can imagine in a city, it would be in the city. It was a moving city. So that's the thing. So everyone would start mobilizing, and despite the efforts of him trying to evade, try to quell the flow of information, it still happened. Everyone caught wind of, okay, Shah Jahan is ill, the king is dead. They thought the king was dead. We need to start mobilizing. And you see Dara Shikoh, as I said before, many of the Muslims, they were scared that Dara Shikoh come into power. Why? Because, as I said before, he believed that the Vedas and the Upanishads were the concealed scriptures. This is what he believed. So he made this theory, remember, of there was a concealed scripture mentioned in the Quran, and that the Vedas and the Upanishads were there. And he believed that the Upanishads were the ultimate source of monotheism. Not Islam, but the Upanishads. And as I said as well, he wrote this book called The Meeting of the Two Seas, basically saying that Islam and Hinduism have the same source and they have the same outcome. However, Aurangzeb, he had the support of the ulama. Why? Because firstly, he was very pious. They knew he was very pious. He would pray 5 times a day. He would do all the things that a devout Muslim would do. And one interesting thing was that he was a campaign in 1647, not the one in Kandahar, another one, around Uzbek lands. And in the middle of the battle, do you know what Aurangzeb done? He dismounted his horse and he started praying namaz. He started praying salah in the middle of the battle, when there's cannon fodder, where there's arrows, where there's people fighting and stuff like that. That's what he done. And this galvanized the people, because they were like, this guy is so pious that he doesn't care if he dies. He's going to pray first. He's going to give his rights to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead of just, in the battlefield. So he was very, he was loved amongst his officers because of that. Furthermore, he would lead the janazah prayer. Whoever died in battle, or whoever died, whether it was battle or not, whether it was regular, he would lead the janazah prayer. So this shows you someone that has responsibility, that has leadership, that has deen. So he was loved by the ulama, the theologians, the scholars, the Muslims, everyone, all the Muslims. He had the support of the Muslims. And lastly, during his princely career, he would patronize a lot of Muslim mystical figures. So, because as I said before, there was a lot of Sufi orders and dervishes that were prevalent throughout the Mughal Empire. He would patronize the mystics, or the leaders of these dervishes, and the dervishes themselves. So he was loved by the Muslims in India. However, even though their different understandings of the religion formulated during their princely life, this antagonism of their religious beliefs did not come about up until when the War of Succession began. Because think about it, you know when you have an issue with someone, other issues start to get amplified. Before you might think, oh, you know, that issue's not that bad, that issue's not that bad, you might forget about it. However, because of this issue of religiosity that was there, but not that much, it amplified during it increased during the War of Succession. So yeah, I digress. What happened? Shah Shuja in Bengal, he crowned himself the emperor. Then afterwards, in Gujarat, Murad declared himself the emperor. However, Aurangzeb stayed calm. He was nonchalant about this. Why? Because he knew that it wasn't about naming yourself. There was still a war to be fought. Because remember what I said in the beginning? Ya takht, ya tabut. Either the throne or the coffin. They knew that it was survival of the fittest. It wasn't about just naming yourself. It's about claiming that throne by any means necessary. Because everyone could claim it, but it doesn't actually mean you are the emperor up until you've defeated all the possible opponents. So what happened is that Aurangzeb, he sent a correspondence to Murad, stating that they should ally and they would divide the empire between themselves. So Murad would get the north and Aurangzeb would get the south. So afterwards they agreed. Murad agreed. They afterwards they marched. Aurangzeb marched northwards, and he was met by Murad's army. And they met, and then they fought Shah Jahan's forces that were supporting Dara Shikoh at the Battle of Darmat. And even though Aurangzeb's forces were outnumbered, they emerged victorious. And the reason for this was that due to the superior tactics and military skills of Aurangzeb. And then afterwards, at Delhi, Dara Shikoh rebuilt his army, about 60,000 men. And he awaited his brothers at a defensive position just south of Agra. However, Aurangzeb outflanked him, and they met at a village called Samogar, where again Aurangzeb emerged victorious. And as a result, Dara fled the battlefield. So Dara fled and he was on the run. Aurangzeb's next opponent was his father. And this is one of the biggest criticisms.
So his father died
No,
now?
he basically, his father didn't appear, but he was actually alive. But he's just ill. So his father told Aurangzeb, why don't you divide the empire into four? Divide the empire into four. You know, everyone gets a chunk. However, Aurangzeb didn't want this because he knew, like, it's winner takes all. He wasn't on this, you know, because when you have that idea, okay, I'm going to take this when I'm older, you don't want to settle. You don't want to just have like a little state after you were promised bigger, because of the whole idea of, you know, fighting your brothers for the throne. And while he was saying this to his son, he sent a secret message to his, he intended to send a secret message to his son Dara, saying, collect an army in Delhi and fight Aurangzeb. But Aurangzeb intercepted this. So as a result, Aurangzeb besieged his father's forts at Agra, and he deprived him of water. And so eventually he surrendered. And that's where Shah Jahan stayed for 7 years as a prisoner. And he wasn't a prisoner in the sense that, you know, he was confined, he was in Guantanamo Bay, and, you know, he had no light at all. This was actually a palace, but he was enclosed in his palace. And he also had like a big mirror that he could see the reflection of the Taj Mahal. And you might be wondering why, because the Taj Mahal was built for his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal. And they had so many children, and he was so in love with her that after she died, he wasn't the same. He started drinking and he started taking more drugs. And as I said, they all drunk, they all took opium. But the addiction intensified, and it was exacerbated by the death of his wife. So he was treated by one of his daughters, that they would come, bring him food, give him company. So it wasn't a thing where he was imprisoned and he was locked up. It was more of a thing where he was treated like a house arrest, for lack of better words. So Shah Jahan is locked up. Dara Shikoh is on the run. However, there's still one issue. Well, there's a few issues, but this main issue is Murad at the minute. So there's rising tensions, right? Right? Because remember, there was that correspondence. We will divide the empire once we defeat our enemies. However, it was not happening. It was not... Murad was waiting like, aren't you going to divide the empire, this and that, the third? But it never happened. And Aurangzeb knew this. He knew that Murad was getting a bit antagonistic, a bit angry of what was happening. Of what was not happening, sorry. So Aurangzeb ordered him to dinner. He had him unarmed. He gave him alcohol to drink to relax him. And so when he was relaxed, he imprisoned his brother and Murad's son. So he was imprisoned. So that's Murad, and that is his father Shah Jahan. These two issues are mitigated. Now the next person Aurangzeb has to deal with is Shah Shuja. And Shah Shuja is defeated by Aurangzeb and his son. They fight with each other, alongside each other, against Shah Shuja. And this is at the Battle of Khawaja. They fight, and as a result, he's on the run. He flees. Shah Shuja, he's on the run. He's on the run in Bengal, and then he eventually, in 1661, he flees to Burma, or it's called Arakan back in them days. It was, the Rakhine state where the Rohingya live. It was called the Arakan. And initially, by the Arakanese ruler, he was taken in fine. However, the Arakanese ruler thought that this guy was going to cause issue. Maybe the Mughal Empire will invade. The reason why the ruler executed Shah Shuja, the Arakanese ruler, was due to the fact that he believed the Mughal Empire under Aurangzeb would invade. So he wanted to cut this issue, and so he done his job for him. Now Shah Shuja actually gets executed a few years later, but we still have in the meantime, Dara Shikoh. The issue of Dara Shikoh is still there. And Dara Shikoh, he regains the courage, and he acquires funds, and he recruits a 20,000 man army in Gujarat, and he marches north to liberate his father. And they eventually meet Aurangzeb's army at the Battle of Dirai. And Aurangzeb emerged victorious. As a result, Dara Shikoh again fled the battlefield. So he had a lot of cowardice kind of tendencies. He would fight in a battle, then leave, fight in a battle, then leave, fight in a battle, then leave, lose. So he was on the run.
Was he the one on the back of the elephant, like it?
Huh?
Yeah, was Dara Shikoh the one on the back of the elephant?
Yeah.
And he was the one with the books.
Yeah.
Okay.
This caused Dara Shikoh to go on the run again. And he tried to find refuge, but an Afghan nobleman by the name of Malik Jiwan, he betrayed him. He was like, yeah, and then he arrested him and sent him to the emperor. And Dara Shikoh at Delhi was humiliated. He was humiliated, paraded on the streets and humiliated. And Dara Shikoh was executed by his brother. He was executed, and he got people to justify his execution, because he wanted to always do things by the book, right? So that's what. And then he got his other brother at the same time, Murad, in a similar time, executed. Why? Because Murad had killed one of his officers during the War of Succession, so he used that as a ground to execute. So now this is Aurangzeb. All his brothers have been eliminated. So in the aftermath of this War of Succession, what has it caused? It's caused famine, disease, and even monsoons. A war can't cause a monsoon, I know that, but monsoons were it was like all these problems stacked up, and then there was just a monsoon. So what Aurangzeb immediately done was he what's it called? He gave food and increased the alms to the poor and the needy because of the devastation caused by the War of Succession. And you may be wondering why he called himself Aurangzeb, because his actual name was Mohir al-Din. The reason he calls himself Aurangzeb means the ornament of the throne. That's his like name that he would be known as. And Alamgir is his regnal title, his title as a ruler. And Alamgir means world Caesar. A world Caesar in the sense, not in the Planet of the Apes, you know, Caesar or Caesar of the Roman Empire. Caesar in the terms of you seize something. Or Caesar's actually the correct term, but sometimes people say conqueror of the world. And one thing that, you know, Aurangzeb actually done in his reign is he brought the Mughal Empire to its greatest extent. So there's this kind of irredentist understanding of an undivided India called Akhand Bairat, meaning undivided India. But the reason that kind of notion comes into play, and that notion exists, that irredentist idea, and irredentist is basically a term to describe a great, like your greater country. So greater Albania, greater Turkey, greater Italy, you know, these kind of, that's an irredentist view, an irredentist ideology. So this Akhbad Bairat, which is a kind of irredentist view that people have, some people have, it actually, like, people got to thank Aurangzeb for that, because Aurangzeb, during his time, he conquered 95%. He didn't conquer all, like 95% in the sense that his ancestors done 50, 40, 50, 60% of the job, but he brought the Mughal Empire to its greatest extent. You know, most of India, just a little bit, the tip of the south of India was not under Aurangzeb's control, including Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh. So all of this was under Aurangzeb. And furthermore, under Aurangzeb, 25% of the world's wealth was in India, under Aurangzeb, because of his conquests. And also, India was a very productive place for agriculture, for trade, you know. That's why the British wanted the, you know, all the Europeans, they wanted a piece of India because it was so prosperous and so rich. And you might be wondering, like, wasn't India ever united before him? Well, there's one weak case, and that is it's called the Mauryan Empire. The Mauryan Empire was in the I think before Christ, BC times, yeah? That's when they ruled India. And how they ruled India, yes, some people claim they ruled all of India. But the thing is, back then, because there were so few people, certain regions would be like empty islands. And it would be networks of like strips of like land that they would control, right? So some people say, but most academic historians, they dispute this claim. So Aurangzeb was the first to unite the whole of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and also parts of Afghanistan. Yes, there was a place called Hind. Hind in the Arabic language. Hind normally just meant the north of India.
Yeah.
And that's why most speak Hindi.
Or India itself.
Yeah. No. India, now we call Hind as the whole of India, but back then it was referred to as the north of India, because north of India and south of India are much different.
Okay.
So that's the thing about Aurangzeb. He actually brought the Mughal Empire to its greatest extent. And the reason he done this was because as soon as he became emperor, he embarked on a vigorous program of imperial expansion in 3 regions. So the first region he focused on was the northern eastern part of the subcontinent, Bengal. He built up this fleet of ships, and he conquered Chittagong. And why, you might be wondering, why just this city? Of course, surrounding regions as well, but why just this city? Because Chittagong was the finest port, one of the finest ports, one of the best lucrative and best ports in the Ganges Delta in northern India. And however, he also focused on his northwestern frontier, which is modern day Afghanistan. So in that region, in the 1660s and the 1670s, what's it called? There was a lot of rebellions there. A lot of people called themselves kings, mint coins in their name, you know, these kind of things. And when you call yourself king and then you mint yourself a coin in your name, what's gonna happen? You're gonna cause strife. And so that's what Aurangzeb done. He caught wind of this, and so he was like, you know what, I need to shut these down. So he personally oversaw the operations of quelling the situation in the northwest frontier, so in Afghanistan. So one way he would do this was that he would put the different clans against each other. He would win over tribal chieftains with gifts, lavish subsidies, and promises of productive jagirs. And jagirs meant like estates, like lands, like plots of lands. He was like, you know what, if you side with me, I will let you have these productive lands. And why is a productive land very important? Because, you know, it's easier to produce agriculture and then sell it, and it's just it just makes you money, and everyone's motivated by money from, you know, since the day humanity started, right? So that is the northwestern frontier. You've got the northeast in Bengal. Now the biggest issue is the south. So there was a rebellion in Marwar, and Marwar is, if I'm not mistaken, in the central to southern regions of India. And one of the Rajas, the Raja is a ruler, he had died without an heir. So one claimant immediately put his claim out there. He was like, I want to be the new ruler. However, he was widely opposed. So Aurangzeb caught wind of this. So he put someone else in charge. But he was also opposed. Opposed, why? Because he was a pretender. He had no lineage to the former Raja, the former ruler. So he was actually kidnapped, this new ruler that Aurangzeb put, which caused a rebellion. So there was problems in Marwar, and it also expanded into surrounding regions. So Aurangzeb moved his imperial courts, and after a struggle, he managed to subdue them. As one of the commanders, he asked for peace. He was like, he basically betrayed his fellow rebels, and he sued for peace. The Rajput rebellion also is called the Rajput rebellion. It also led to Aurangzeb moving permanently to the Deccan. So he was in the north normally. Sometimes he'll move to the south, do a campaign, or go to north, or as I said, northeast or northwest. You know, all of these kind of things. But then he decided to permanently move to the Deccan in around 1681, 1682. Why did he decide to do that? Well, firstly, because of this Rajput rebellion. And secondly, because his son helped this rebellion. So his son, called Prince Akbar, betrayed him. The reason why Prince Akbar betrayed Aurangzeb is because he got overconfident. He got cocky. He was like, I've gained some victories here. I feel like I'm qualified to become the next ruler. And according to, it is in this book right here, this book, Mughal Princes, by Munis Farooqi, the historian here says that this was the closest that a prince ever got to overthrowing the emperor without actually overthrowing. Do you get what I mean? Like he was so close to overthrowing the emperor. But Aurangzeb was quite savvy. He was a very intelligent individual. What he done was that he was about to go to fight, because Akbar he got support of the Rajputs. He basically sided with them to usurp his father's crown. Yeah, so they're about to fight. They're about to go into battle. However, Aurangzeb infiltrated their camp, and he said to the Rajputs, Akbar led you into a trap. He has played you. So what happened? The Rajput rulers and all their soldiers, they all fled. So Aurangzeb faced his son's army. Guess how much his army was? Around a few hundred men. Because all his supporters fled. Because Aurangzeb was able to persuade them and convince them that, you know, you've been put into a trap. So as a result, Akbar fled. He fled, and he fled into the south, seeking refuge with anti-Mughal rebels, anti-Mughal communities, anti-Mughal societies in the south. So that's one issue in the south. The next issue in the south was the Marathas, and the Marathas were ruled by the Marathis, and the Marathis were a people group in the south of India, and they created their own empire called the Maratha, or the Maratha Confederacy. And the founder of the Maratha Confederacy, or the Maratha Empire, was a man by the name of Shivaji. Shivaji got some land from his father, Shaji. Afterwards, Shivaji, when he came of age, he started to conquer lands. He started to carve out a little state, taking small forts. And so slowly, bit by bit, he started to, cause issues. And Aurangzeb was aware of this, even during his princely career. But after he became emperor, he was like, you know what? I need to face this issue head on. So he sent his uncle, Shaista Khan, to reassert imperial authority in the region, because Shivaji was causing devastation within south of India and within Mughal territory. However, Shivaji made in 1663, so this is quite early on, he made a daring night raid into Shaista Khan's house, injuring Shaista Khan and killing his son. Then in the following year, Shivaji went all the way to northern India to sack where? To sack the city of Surat. Surat, throughout history, has been a very prosperous city because it's the gateway to Arabia. It's one of the best ports to go to Arabia. And that's why, Surat has a lot of Muslims because of, the trade of Arab Muslims, and they went to Surat and traded, and Surat was very rich because of its strategic location. So what did he do afterwards? Aurangzeb in 1665, the following year, he sends one of his generals to quell the situation. And it takes about a year, and afterwards, after a year of, pressing on the Maratha state, and he finally is able to capture Shivaji. And Shivaji, he's brought to court in 1666. He's brought to court in 1666, and within the Mughal court, you have this kind of, you have these protocols where everything's choreographed, you have certain rituals that you do in, not like rituals in the shirki sense, but certain things that you do, you walk in a certain way, people attend in a certain way, like all these kind of things. But Shivaji was given a very low position within the hierarchy of this kind of choreographed Mughal court ceremony. And he made a fit out of it. He got angry and he went on the floor and started moving about and crying and stuff like that. Like, it was very weird, bizarre what he done. So he was imprisoned, but he managed to escape. And the reason why he managed to escape was due to the fact he bribed people along the way. So he returned back to the south of India. And in 1669, he again began to cause issues for the Mughal state. Again, waging war and waging a kind of, to carve out his own empire and whatnot. And again, in the following year, in 1670, he raided Surat again. And as I said before, Surat was a very strategic and lucrative port city. So Aurangzeb had to deal with this. And the thing is, with Shivaji, he decided to call himself the Maharaja Chhatrapati, meaning the universal emperor. So he basically said, I don't recognize you, Aurangzeb. You're not a ruler, I'm the ruler, and I'm taking this title. And the reason why he was able to do this was due to the fact that the Bijapur Sultanate was very weak. They actually put in a 4-year-old ruler. I'm not even joking. A 4-year-old ruler was put in. So the Bijapur Sultanate was very weak. And so Shivaji, by the end of his reign, he managed to rule a sizable piece of, landmass. And he died in 1680. And he was replaced by his son, Sambhaji. And during this time, after the death of Shivaji in 1680, Aurangzeb moved to the Deccan in 1681 to 1682 because Sambhaji was continuing this, and he had inherited a sizable state, and he was continuing taking up arms against the Mughal Empire. And initially, he tried to mobilize, the Bijapur and Golconda Sultanate against the Marathas. Let's fight the Marathas. However, what happened is that the Bijapur Sultanate and the Golconda Sultanate, they were in collusion with the Marathas. So they would sometimes ally with each other, then not ally with each other. You know these kind of things, right? So he said, you know what? I need to defeat these two sultanates head on. So in 1686, he defeated the Bijapur Sultanate, and then in 1687, the Golconda Sultanate fell. So these two issues were eradicated. So now he focused solely on the Marathas, and he focused on the Marathas throughout his life from 1687 up until he returned back to Allah in 1707. So about more than 20. I know that's 19 years because he was fighting the Marathas before, but the last 19 years of his life was just fighting the Marathas. And there's a kind of, yes, he brought the Mughal Empire to its greatest extent. He conquered 95% of the subcontinent. But due to the fact that he was so focused on capturing forts and capturing territory, it actually was the undoing of the Mughal Empire, because the risk, of putting all those resources, all those men, the reward wasn't that much, because he would capture a fort, he'll capture a small fort here, he'll capture a fort there, and then sometimes he would lose it straight away, because because the Marathas, they had a kind of, they had it's called guerrilla tactics, where guerrilla comes from the Spanish word, guerra, meaning war, and illa is like a added word meaning little. So called little war, where they would go on raids and then come back. So it'd be like hit and run tactics, right? Yeah, so that's what the Marathas would do. And so he would capture a fort after besieging for months on end, and they sometimes would recapture it straight away. But, eventually he did conquer about 95% of the subcontinent, and 25% of the world's wealth was in India by the time he perished. So I've still got a lot to go through. I've still got about 10 slides, but I'll leave it at that. Jazakallah khair. Any good is from Allah. Any mistakes are my own. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.